Intermediaries working on getting us to Cuba, and if any of you can help with that, it would be very helpful. And also to China, hopefully in the next year or so. And in fact, I've been talking to Ambassador Newman about possibilities of Bahrain and also Afghanistan. I'd like Rui Ramazani to actually stand up because he has been called the spiritual father of this, the Robert H. Smith International Center for Jefferson Studies. He insisted that it be called international and that it had an international vision. He was responsible for bringing President Khatami here in 2006. Now, Khatami was the highest-ranking Iranian official to come to the United States since 1979. And in this library, he had an open forum and took questions from the floor. It was the only place in the United States that he did it. We had the biggest security detail in the history of Monticello, gunships, snipers on the roof. I was the only person outside the library without a bulletproof vest, and I was really worried about friendly fire because I hadn't heard of any of these different organizations that protect groups. We're about to create a conference center up on Monte Alto, which is the mountain overlooking Monticello, for which we just paid the same as the Louisiana land purchase. I got 40 acres in exchange, rather less than Jefferson. I think so. But we need a place to have a dialogue, to have conversations like this. Clearly, we don't always want to be clearing the readers out of the library, and this will have, and it's actually the highest peak in this part of the world between here and Portugal, and it has almost aerial views of Monticello, and you do see the view of the nickel from afar. And I think it'll be a remarkable place. We'd even like to have some high-level political summits, and we'd certainly like to have the American Academy of Diplomacy come back. Well, I was talking to Fred Hitz earlier. Next time, we must bus up students from the university because they're the generation that we really need to influence, and we need them to be hearing these conversations and these marvelous speakers. Now, we should have a little more time for discussion in this session, but Leslie did mention that this is the ground of another president besides Jefferson, and that is President Roosevelt, who was here the 4 days leading up to D-Day, and the house next door was the home of his assistant, Paul Watson. And it was, of course, Roosevelt who, during his administration, the Jefferson Memorial was built, and during his administration, Jefferson was put on the nickel. And Jefferson also owned this land, so we are on the land of two presidents. Well, I think we'll begin by asking Ambassador James Dobbins to speak. He's the only member of the panel who has not yet been introduced, so it's the only introduction I'll do. He's the former US representative to the Afghan opposition. He's former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, and he's recently undertaken missions of crisis missions in Haiti, in Somalia, in Bosnia, and Kosovo. And it's a very great pleasure to have him with us today. Thank you.
Experience in Afghanistan in some historical context, and also to talk about the requirements for either state building or nation building, whichever term one prefers. The deployment of military forces opens an opportunity for change in states that are either in conflict or are emerging from conflict. But the military forces themselves don't bring about the changes. They simply open a window of opportunity. And if you don't take the initiatives necessary to change the underlying circumstances in that society, the situation will revert to the status quo ante once the forces leave, and you won't have achieved anything of lasting value. Now, the things that you need to achieve and the sort of prerequisites for a successful post-conflict mission consist of the following kinds of things. First of all, you need to establish security. This is primarily a military mission, although police are also involved. And that means that you need both to stop the fighting, but also to provide for a minimum level of public safety, without which any of the other reforms that you introduce will tend to be washed away in the ongoing violence. The second thing you need to do is look to the humanitarian needs of the populace, that is food, water, shelter, access to health care. These are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily civilian functions that NGOs perform in these kinds of situations. The third thing you need to do is reestablish some form of minimal governance. That is, somebody has to pick up the garbage. Somebody has to perform essential public services, reopen the schools, reopen the clinics, turn on the lights. So you do need some level of governance, even if you decapitate the government that happens to be there, or it's collapsed into anarchy. You need to restart the economy. You need to get people to stop killing each other and go back to work. And that means doing things like stabilizing the currency, opening the borders to trade, and encouraging the resumptions of basic banking and other services in the society. Next, you need to begin to establish some longer-term arrangements for governance of the society. Writing a constitution if they don't have one, holding elections, promoting the development of political parties, free press, civil society, those kinds of things. And finally, you need to look toward longer-term development and give a sense that there's some progress in terms of the basic conditions of life in the society. So those are the basic prerequisites of a successful post-conflict reconstruction mission. Now, the U.S. Went through a series of these in the 1990s and gradually got better. If you look at the Clinton administration interventions in Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, and Kosovo, you see that each of them was rather better organized and more successful than the last. Somalia was a complete failure. There were some valuable lessons learned, but nothing of enduring value was accomplished. Haiti was more successfully conducted, but the U.S. left after only 2 years, and you can't fix a society as profoundly broken as Haiti in 2 years. And so pretty soon the situation did revert to the status quo ante, and the U.S. had to invade again in 2004, 10 years later. Bosnia and Kosovo, the interventions have been of more enduring value as a result of the lessons learned. And there were several lessons that were learned in the 90s. One was that you need to deploy a decisive force. You need to go in with a large enough force so that you not only establish security, but you also deter the emergence of a violent resistance movement. In any of these situations, there are going to be spoilers who will work against your objectives, who will try to frustrate whatever reforms that you try to put in place. But if you succeed in deterring the emergence of a violent resistance, they're confined to essentially criminal and political means in order to frustrate you, which is frustrating, but it's a lot better than facing a violent resistance movement. And so the size and capacity of the force you deploy to establish security is the prime determinant in that story. Secondly, you need to accept the responsibility for public security as well as the security of your own forces. If the citizens of a society don't feel able to circulate freely and to engage in free debate, you're going to have a very difficult time introducing the kinds of economic and political reforms that are important to make the intervention worthwhile. And thirdly, you're going to have to involve in some constructive way neighbors and near neighbors, because they have inordinate influence over the society you're trying to stabilize by reason of their proximity. And they are going to interfere, and so you need to try to make sure their interference is at least convergent with your own rather than at cross purposes with your own. So those were basically the lessons that I think the Clinton administration had learned by the end of the 1990s. Now, we then came to Afghanistan, the Bush administration. The Bush was a new administration. The Bush administration had come into office arguing that nation building was an inappropriate task for the United States. This was, in fact, the only foreign or security policy issue discussed in the three Bush-Gore debates, the televised debates that preceded the election. Everything else was domestic politics. The one thing that was foreign policy was Bush arguing that he wasn't going to do any more nation building, no more Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo type activities. It was inappropriate. And Condoleezza Rice, who was Bush's advisor, wrote an article in Foreign Affairs in which she criticized sarcastically these situations by arguing that, paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division shouldn't be escorting children to school in Kosovo, that just wasn't an appropriate activity. And their job was to fight and win America's wars, not worry about what happened afterwards. So this was the mindset with which the administration faced the situation in Afghanistan, which of course was unanticipated by everybody, including them. The administration was very successful in meeting the immediate needs of responding to 9/11, displacing the Taliban, expelling Al-Qaeda, and replacing the Taliban regime with a new and much better regime. That was accomplished in a matter of weeks. And the impression created was that that was all we needed to do, and that the situation would stabilize at that point, and we could afford to remain minimally engaged. Don Rumsfeld actually gave speeches and wrote op-ed articles in which he argued that the United States and NATO, by flooding Bosnia and Kosovo with international military manpower and economic assistance, had turned those societies into permanent wards of the international community. And he said we were going to avoid this trap in Afghanistan and also in Iraq by minimizing the commitment of those kinds of resources, that we would commit as few troops and as little money as possible in order to make these societies more self-sustaining more quickly. This was in effect a transposition of the American debate on welfare to the international realm. One could not, in retrospect, think of a less apt analogy. And the strategy of what was called then small footprint, low profile approach to nation building or state building turned out to be vastly more expensive, because what it allowed was the emergence of violent resistance movements to gain ground, organize, begin to intimidate the population. And if you reinforced only after your initial commitment proved to be ineffective, you ended up continually reinforcing in response to crisis and challenge, and allowing the opposition time to continue to gain momentum. And so in both cases, this turned out to be a vastly more expensive approach. I was in charge of the diplomacy, which led to the installation of the Karzai regime, which was done, as I mentioned, very quickly. I arrived, when I first arrived in Afghanistan, there were less than 200 American troops in the country. And when we inaugurated Karzai in December of 2001, Tommy Franks, the American military commander for the Central Command, came to join me for Karzai's inaugural in Kabul. And he flew in a helicopter into Kabul, and then we drove around Kabul in one of my vehicles. And we did that because the only armored vehicles in Afghanistan in December of 2001 were State Department vehicles. There were no American armored vehicles, American military armored vehicles in the country. And there were only, as I said, a few hundred American troops in the country. So we've been very quick and very successful in moving to constitute a government that was universally recognized internationally and was broadly representative within Afghanistan and had the support of the Afghan people. But the administration took the position that we were not going to do any peacekeeping. That is, we would go around and chase down Al-Qaeda, but we were not going to accept any responsibility for public security, for public safety in the country. And we were not going to let anybody else do so either. So the Afghans asked for international peacekeeping forces. The U.S. administration agreed that there could be a small force for Kabul, because without that, the exiles wouldn't go back and you wouldn't have been able to install Karzai. But despite the fact that both the UN and Karzai asked for these peacekeeping forces to be stationed elsewhere in the country, the administration blocked that. And so we had about 10,000 American troops in the country, 25 million, or actually 32 million is what we thought it was 25 million, it turns out it's about 32 million. To give you a comparison, we had 60,000 troops in Bosnia, a country of 3 million. We had 50,000 troops, American and NATO, in Kosovo, a country of 2 million. So the force, as a proportion of the population in Bosnia and Kosovo, was 50 times bigger than the force in Afghanistan for the first couple of years after the American intervention. Assistance levels were similarly skewed. The assistance levels for Bosnia on a per capita basis were 16 times larger than the assistance levels for Afghanistan. For instance, the average Bosnian received $800 a year in U.S. and foreign assistance for the first several years after the war. In Afghanistan, the figure was $50 a year. So if you want to know why Bosnia was more secure and more prosperous 1 or 2 years after the war than Afghanistan, all you have to do is look to the level of resources. And the lesson is, low input, low output. If you apply low levels of money and manpower in a post-conflict situation, what you get are low levels of security and economic growth. So those were the early results in Afghanistan. Now things began to change, and I think Ron, who became ambassador, succeeded me several times removed in responsibilities for the country, I think will talk about a situation in which we began slowly, gradually, and still only in response to pressure to turn this around and to apply greater levels of manpower and money to the problem. And so I'll turn the floor back over to Ron to continue the story.
We reversed the order of the speakers.
Thanks. Still, I wasn't hearing well last time, so let me somehow try to combine the closeness of the microphone with the distance of the bifocals. Just to put you situationally in mind, from the time that Jim was talking about at the beginning in Afghanistan to when I came on board in 2005, the security situation had begun to worsen. The insurgency had already returned to some extent in eastern Afghanistan, where the bulk of what was by then about 25,000 American troops were deployed. There were signs, clear signs, that a major insurgency was about to break out in southern Afghanistan, which we duly reported. But we had almost no troops in southern Afghanistan. We had one battalion covering the area. When we turned over Helmand province, where you now see all the newspaper stories about the Marines, when we turned that province over to a very meager force of Brits in 2005, we had one 200-person provincial reconstruction team in Helmand and a few special forces. What I want to, that was sort of where we were. We were already a somewhat larger force of troops, but only about 25% of what we had in Iraq, facing the start of a growing insurgency and about to face an explosion. I don't want to kind of walk you through the events. That's a different lecture for a different time. What I do want to talk about, because this conference about lessons learned, is 3 particular areas that go to the lessons, to the personnel, and to intellectual development and training that we still need to do. One is the gap in personnel in order to work on assistance. The second is a mindset of the difference between stabilization, humanitarian relief, and development. And the third is the business of interaction between different agencies. In terms of aid, we had gone up a great deal by the time I arrived. We did not begin what we would call development assistance, that is something other than humanitarian relief and short-term kind of bandage aid, until the 2004 fiscal year, which means with our system, it doesn't begin to actually, you don't begin to see anything much on the ground before about late 2004, 2005. Many of these were national programs. When you got down to the provinces, and we've talked about the original reconstruction teams, we had at the time I arrived, I think about 14 or 18, and we had by the time I left 25, of which about half were U.S., the other half comprising various NATO nations, but in all but two of the other non-U.S. NATO PRTs, we had a U.S. political officer and a U.S. aid officer. Looking for the moment at the U.S. teams, where we were the heaviest, we had one AID officer. We had one state officer. Given the leave package, which people do need to get out, otherwise it's very hard to get up there in the first place, it would mean that we would effectively have each of those positions covered 10 months out of 12. That is not a serious way to fight a war. The AID people had no ability to mount small-scale projects directly on their own. They could only do so through what we call implementing partner, that is a large-scale contractor, which meant that the project idea had to go up to Kabul to be approved and back down to some form of subcontractor in the region. That is not a function of stupidity. It is a function of the lack of personnel. And the lesson which I took away from this, which I continue to harp on, is that you have to have a package to work at a provincial level. You have to have the money, obviously, but you also have to have the personnel who are authorized to write the contracts. They have to have the authority to do so, and they have to have a staff which is sufficient to oversee contracts, so they all end up going to Leavenworth at the end, and it's not the Commander General Staff College to which I refer. And then they have to have enough security and ability to move to oversee the work. So now we're doing a lot of what we call civilian surge in Afghanistan, but you need, at a minimum, a package of personnel, authority, and resources, which we have not yet achieved and which we are reaching only with great difficulty on the personnel side in Afghanistan now. But we have a template for what one has to do. Now, beyond that, you obviously need to know a lot more about the country. And one of the big issues America's going to have to deal with is, will we do these kinds of wars for 8 years, or will we do them for 1 year at a time, 8 times, with a consequent lack of learning? We were accused of doing that in Vietnam, and we've managed to replicate that. People do get on the ground in the present and begin to declaim about tribal issues and all sorts of things with the expertise. I think some of them begin to see themselves as the reincarnation of British political officers. Forgetting, of course, British political officer got his first home leave after 12 years and paid a certain debt to acquire the linguistic and political expertise, which all too often is British military and civil superiors paid no attention to anyway. But in any event, this was the situation. These were the lessons we learned in the gaps. The second thing I want to talk about is one of the issues in which you get a great deal of tugging back and forth, this business of what is development, stabilization. These are terms of art within the development community, and they use them in different ways. Humanitarian aid is just keeping people alive today. Reconstruction has a particular technical definition for people who work in the area. It's getting stuff rebuilt that you just broke. It has nothing to do with getting the country moving as a whole, which is part of development. Now, obviously, if you do it intelligently, it's part of development. But one of the things which is definable from Afghanistan And Afghanistan is perhaps a pure example in Iraq, because Iraq had in many respects a functioning economy, albeit beleaguered by sanctions, and a much more modern society. Afghanistan had neither at the beginning of 25 years of war, and then tore it all apart. And so the question is, how do you link what you do, what is essential to do at the beginning of a conflict, humanitarian support and reconstruction, to sensible development? And there's a certain view that would say, well, let's get to that when we get to it. But these things are not sequential. Because, I'll give you a couple examples. If you build a school, which my military colleagues could do a darn sight faster than I could do with our 8 procedures, partly because they were relieved of a number of federal laws that we weren't, they could build a school faster. They could not, on a local level, integrate the building of that school into the plans of the education ministry, without which there would be no teacher and with no follow-on support, no books, no makeup. Same thing, they can build a clinic, but without being integrated into a national plan, it is either a permanent ward of us or somebody, or it lacks a clinician and medicines. And so, from the earliest beginning, you need to be thinking, when you do things, how are you going to link them? It's wonderful to have a good idea, but if it is not linked somehow in more than a hope, my military colleagues would always repeat that hope is not a plan. If you don't link it somehow, it becomes the wasted detritus of another foreign effort to do something, and that litters the landscape of Afghanistan for the last 100 years. And so, people need to understand this. It's fine to talk about it, but if you can't put enough aid people in with military, if you can't link in planning, and Oz report talks a lot about the need for planning. If you can't have the people resources who know the subject to plan it, you will not plan it adequately, no matter what lip service you give to the need. So it is again a place where I think Afghanistan is a very specific and particular lesson to teach us in what the lack of having the people, the advanced training, the thinking means when you come to screw it up in the field. And then the last thing I'd just like to touch on, because I think it is going to continue with us as an issue of training, not so much as an issue of what we build in systems. And that is the need to work together across institutional lines. One of the reasons that I think you had excellent cooperation, say, between Ambassador Crocker and General Petraeus in Iraq. You had abominable cooperation between Ambassador Bremer and General Sanchez, their predecessors, and it hurt the situation. Looking at Afghanistan, with then General Eikenberry, now Ambassador, we would meet at least once a week, he with his list and I with my list, and we would spend a lot of time one-on-one working through our issues. But the foundation of this work at our level was, on my side, my recognition that if we didn't get progress on governance and economics, and the very things that Jim Dobbs just laid out, we were not going to have success. He wasn't going to go home, and therefore he had every reason to be involved in those. Aside from the fact that he had money, he probably would do it anyway. By the same token, what he did in those realms and in the security realm made a difference to what I could do politically and how I could field these programs. And therefore, by the same token, that the military has a right to be heavily involved in what used to be civilian activities, I had every right to be involved right down to the operational level in what was going on in the security field. In other words, in a situation like Afghanistan, and there have been a number of others before, and since we keep having them, I have every reason to believe we'll have more, there are no clear lanes. There is no turf. There's no mine. There's no yours. And the effort to separate lanes of responsibility is an effort that results in policy incoherence. Therefore, you have to have this very fuzzy immersion. But to do that, people have to be trained to work with each other. It's not enough to have it work well at the top level, because there are thousands of decisions being made every day of the week, down low, the lower levels, between the PRT commander and his civilian partners in the PRT, between the maneuver leaders, between brigade commanders and aid teams, and cross-references with national aid programs, between Afghan government officials. And remember, Afghanistan, we were scarcely alone. When I left, we had 40 economic donors, and we had 36 troop contributors. And this really illustrated Churchill's comment that alliance warfare is an endless tale of mutual recrimination. So you have to learn to work with each other and to work across the lines. And since there are 2 points to know about this. One is there is no template. There is no model which you can pick up from one place and apply to another. I would be happy to go on at great length about why, but take my word for it. The second is you cannot solve the problem with the 2 most bandied about solutions. One is a better campaign plan or strategy, and the other is a better chain of command, or a commander, or a czar. The reason you can't is simply because you're coordinating between nation states, and nation states don't take orders from other nation states. And I'm sorry about that, sometimes. But seriously, that's the core of why these 2 favorite solutions are mirages that people chase after when they ought to be digging a well. A campaign plan, a strategy, whether it's a military strategy, a business strategy, a diplomatic one, is a broad plan for how to reach an objective, which you then hand off to a general, a CEO, an ambassador, a special representative, to make all kinds of decisions in order to implement the strategy. When you have your subordinate parts being independent nations, you cannot hand it off to a commander who cannot make decisions for the parts that will not follow them. Therefore, these 2 favorite principles of how to solve the problem are simply wrong. In order to deal with the problem, one has to constantly build consensus. One has to constantly work with difficult people whom one cannot order. This was a lesson that General Eisenhower learned pretty well. It's one of the reasons that made him a great commander in a large sense. It is something that one has to do every day. In order to accomplish that kind of role, we need much more systematic training. Now, the military is way ahead of the civilian ranks because it tries to train people to bridge the gap much more than we do. The military does it primarily at the colonel level and above, or the very bright lieutenant colonel who's been identified to be a colonel. We have not done that. And militaries, now we're doing it, what we call joint operations, we're doing at a much lower level, constantly. And so there's a huge need that we can see. Afghanistan is a good place to illustrate it, but there are many others. Why we are going to have a different kind and level of training across civilians, military, multiple divisions. Goes back to something that we were talking about before that Peter was talking about. Let me just leave it there. There's plenty of other things we could talk about, but I think in these 3 areas, Afghanistan is particularly illustrative of what price you pay for not integrating instruments, for not teaching people to integrate them, and for not having the people and resources and money in play to do what you're going to have to do. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Robert Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, 2 correctives. He said that there were 2 presidents represented here. There are actually 3. His real name is Andrew Jackson O'Shaughnessy. Total coincidence, he tells me, but I'm sure Colonel Hickory would mind. The second thing is somebody this morning said something about the Civil War. When I was growing up in Virginia, we called it the War of Northern Aggression. So which says something about history and definitions about culture and getting things right. When I was a kid in Southern Virginia going to school, I was taught that the Battle of Gettysburg was a draw. When I came north, I was taught the Union had won. It was only when I got into history that I realized it really was a draw, but they had to win. There's a little line about debate going on in the Senate, and somebody says, wait a second, surely everything's already been said. I said, yes, but not everybody said it yet. Follow up my two predecessors have just said, and I think you get the full picture. So let me just add a few thoughts about lessons of Afghanistan, which, one, it's still a work in progress, if that's the right word, in terms of drawing lessons, because we haven't yet seen the back of it or a way to move beyond Afghanistan, nor can we even tell when it's going to happen. One of the first questions is this the kind of thing that's going to happen again? As I say, the worst thing for military people to plan for the last war, it may be that we and others will craft a whole series of tools that will be applicable in this and maybe a couple of other places, and then find that that's not what we need to do again. We have certainly built up a huge amount of lore and a huge amount of capacity, primarily in the military, but also in the non-military. I'll conclude in a minute by saying why the non-military, I believe, will have a lot of applications elsewhere and is a positive, unintended consequence. One of the questions, of course, in Afghanistan is what is America's staying power? How much patience do we have? And how much patience should we have in relationship to our real interests? The United States does not have such a great reputation for hanging around for a long time. We may forget that when we got out of Vietnam, we abandoned the Vietnamese. The Congress of the United States cut off all funding and deprived the South Vietnamese a chance to defend themselves. Divisions of helicopters off rooftops was not when we got out, it was when we had failed to help those others. A lot of people look at this. The commander of the PRT down in Uzbekistan, a Dutch colonel who I visited with, said, the real issue here, as people look around, who is going to be here 10 years from now? You or the Taliban? And they're not going to make that decision until it becomes clear. Now, that relates back to what our interests may be there. And I will assert that we have no underlying strategic interest in Afghanistan. We are there because we were attacked from Afghanistan, or at least attacked by people who were trained there. And as a nation, following 9/11, we had to do something. And I think there is a consensus that what was done was the right thing to do under those circumstances. It might have had a happier ending sooner rather than later, not only the Battle of Tora Bora, but also whether because of the distraction, as it turned out to be, of Iraq. But we weren't there because it was a fundamental strategic interest to us. Beyond that, in fact, we had helped put the Taliban in power because it seemed like a way of stabilizing that country. We trained Osama bin Laden. It seemed like a good thing at the time. Charlie Wilson's war, which everybody chuckles over, was actually the fundamentals of where we got ourselves today. And should be looked at, quite frankly, the opposite way around. Our interests in Afghanistan, if you think about it, are number one, to prevent Pakistan from going ill. Secondly, to keep the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, being able to operate from there with the hopes that we could be able to deal with where they might operate elsewhere. Number three is the reputation of the United States. Number four is the reputation of NATO, now that it's in there. Number five, but this is not an inconsequential interest. Once embarked upon, it's a moral question more than anything else, which is what about the people of Afghanistan? Do they get handed back over to the, quote, tender mercies of the Taliban? It's a very important consideration that we have to weigh in the balance. So, next point. We also have to recognize, as a lesson of Afghanistan, that you can't look at it all by itself. We Americans, maybe it's, I'm going to make a lot of enemies here, a lawyerly culture in foreign affairs, which George Kennan famously argued against, which is to tend to look at individual items as if they're individual clients, rather than seeing that sometimes it's all the same client. The United States is looking at in the area from the Levant to India as though it's 7 or 8 separate issues. It's actually one issue with 7 or 8 different parts. As we can see, even on the impact, if we could talk about that if you wanted, of the Arab-Israeli conflict upon our relations with Europeans and our relations in the Islamic world, even in terms of what we are able and perhaps need to do in Afghanistan. We need to see it in a coordinated, integrated way, and we are not doing so. This is the third administration in a row that has failed to do that, and it is of considerable import to us. Also, I would argue that as we look at Afghanistan, another lesson of it, I'm not saying we have an alternative, I'm just talking about a lesson of it, which also relates to today's immediate topic, is that there are incredible opportunity costs there. On Afghanistan and Iraq, we spent about $1 trillion. Think of what we could have done with $1 trillion here, but also think of the opportunity costs elsewhere in the world, especially in the grand strategy issues of China, India, future of Russia, climate change, etc., etc. I would put Afghanistan in the top 100 items in terms of what our long-term strategic interest is. Okay, we just, on top of that, we need to understand Afghanistan in terms of the immediate relations of different countries. Pakistan's interest in dominating that country, not just through the ISI, but in general. The Pakistanis don't have the same interest we do in Afghanistan. They may be interested in stability, but they want to be their stability. The Indians have an interest there. The Russians have an interest, along with the Iranians, directly in the non-export of poppies. The country suffering most from the drug culture in Afghanistan is Iran. Number 2 is Russia. In fact, about a month and a half ago, we looked it up on the internet, there was an op-ed in the International Herald Tribune by the Russian ambassador to the NATO alliance and a former Soviet battlefield commander in Afghanistan saying if NATO doesn't prevail in Afghanistan, it is a wimp alliance. I couldn't believe it. The Russians say that NATO is a good thing because of all the suffering that they're doing from poppies. Incidentally, when it has come to try to seal the border of Iran, which the Iranians asked us to do, NATO wanted to do it, the United States said no, because we won't deal with Iran. Now, if I were to craft a strategy with regard to Afghanistan, I'd want to see not only how we relate this directly to Pakistan, but the other neighbors, including Iran. We're in a situation now where we're looking at Iran almost solely in terms of the negatives. The nuclear file, Hezbollah, Hamas, and what Ahmadinejad says about the Holocaust and about Israel every time he needs to shore up his domestic base, without understanding that the Iranians do perhaps have an interest with us in the stabilization of Iraq. I have no idea. And certainly have a common interest with us in Afghanistan, as Ambassador Dobbins himself was the negotiator of that when the Iranians, for their own reasons, helped us overthrow the Taliban. And could well be willing to do that again if we were prepared to see this in a holistic way, without defeating any of the other things we have. We've got to see this in an integrated way. Now, next point has to do with whether we are involved there alone or not. After 2001, the morning after 2001, the NATO alliance declared for the first time in its history invoked Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which was originally there for us to defend the Europeans, but they did it because of us. So we did not ask them for that. And in fact, we did not use many of the NATO allies, except the ones who had the military capacity to go in there afterwards. But all the NATO allies went in after 2003, the International Security Assistance Force. All 28 NATO countries have security personnel there, including the Icelanders who don't have a military. A number of them have non-military efforts there, including in many of the provincial reconstruction teams. The allies, however, are not there because most of them share our perspective on what is going on. Today after 9/11, even the French, God help them, the French, in Le Monde, had the famous editorial, do some choosing that was bad, we're all Americans. The Allies responded to 2001 because of a human outpouring of concern for us. Number two, because the United States had been hurt, and they needed the United States not to be hurt. They needed us not to become an isolationist country. They needed us to be able to do what Madeleine Albright got pilloried for saying, to continue being the indispensable country. Maybe other people could do things. Right now, we are the one that does it. And also another view. Since we had come to their, this is the right term, I don't know Europeans here, rescue in 1917 and 1942, and then the Cold War, what would happen here if they didn't come with us then? And that, as much as anything, led them to go into Afghanistan with ISAF, and also because they wouldn't do Iraq, because they disagreed with us. Almost, public opinion in Europe is almost universally negative on Iraq. We got all upset about the Germans and the French, even people who didn't like the war in Iraq, and their basic reason for opposing it is they were afraid we were going to end up exactly where we did. Exactly where we did. All right. So you now have all the allies engaged there. But when it comes to reconstruction, development, and breaking down the barriers between the civilian and the military, where I've already indicated a lot of them have capacity, this will depend not just upon what NATO does. If NATO and the military, through civil military efforts, has to do the job, something's failed. Something's failed. We have Scott Harrop here. He's got a son who's just finished a tour in Iraq. He's going to have to go to Afghanistan. He's an engineer. And I gather not a combat engineer, but a reconstruction engineer. Well, thank you very much for his service and for your holding your breath hard. But that shouldn't be done by the military, except, as was pointed out earlier, to provide security for people who are doing it, ought to be done by civilians. And to an extent, to a great extent, that ought to be done by other institutions. The UN does quite a bit with what they have. We starve them, among others. It should also be done to a great extent by the European Union. But there's some problems there. In the first place, NATO and the European Union continue to be, more than they should be, a phrase I coined, as Bob Beecroft will remember, back in 1993, NATO and the European Union are two institutions living in the same town on different planets. Back then was zero the connection. Today it's not much better. In fact, in Afghanistan today, the NATO people and the European Union people are not allowed even to talk to one another. Why? Because at NATO you have veto power. The Turks veto it all because for some damn fool reason the Greeks got the Cypriots to come into to the European Union without solving the problems there first. And secondly, the Turks have been dissed by the European Union on their membership. So they veto everything. Now there's some workarounds and all that, but it means, among other things, that NATO cannot share its intelligence with the EU people, even though 21 of the 28 countries, members of NATO, also belong to the European Union. It's ridiculous. The European Union has also not appointed somebody of genuine stature to help coordinate their engagement there, or within Europe, and have not ponied up the kind of resources that are necessary. Now, part of that is because we, with our military culture, have created a metric. The Allies are only good if they spend X 2% or more on their military and how many troops they put into Afghanistan. Now, the President's been very careful on this, of not pushing too hard, because he knows very few allies believe that if we do not succeed in Afghanistan, terrorism will come to Europe. Very few believe that. When George Robertson stood up, the former Secretary General in Washington the other day, and said, "We are now at the point of Dunkirk in 1940." A lot of us, cheered because we love George Robertson. But in Europe, people just laugh at that. Laugh at that. There is no, let's say, narrative that will yet convince people in Europe that they have to do this, other than to protect America's role in the world, to protect the alliance, and keep America engaged in Europe. And we're now struggling to get a new grand bargain, where they want us to be engaged more in Europe than we have in recent years to deal with the Ruskies, and we need them where our strategic focus is, which is in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. Now, the new metric, in my judgment, needs to be not just how much are you putting in militarily, but what are you contributing to security overall. What are you putting into reconstruction, development, health, education, and not just in that part of the world. What are you doing in Central Europe and with the former Soviet Union? where they've outspent us. Now, this is what's going to be required as a lesson of Afghanistan for us to be able to get this right. And I promise to a final point, which is if we create these capacities, we can find that, as was already said this morning, it's not just what happens after the conflict, or even what happens during the conflict, because they go together nowadays, but what happens before the conflict. The military talks about phase 0, and the fighting part, then to phase 4, which is the state building, if I may use that term. It comes back to how do you prevent a war? I invented 30 some odd years ago what I call the rule of 33. Now, I just pulled that number out of the air, but I use it anyway. Which is, if you were to invest in societies in helping to shape things, you can do it for 1/33 of the amount of money you will have to spend if you then have to fight a war. Biggest lesson, therefore, of Afghanistan is let's use these tools now to prevent having to do the next Afghanistan.
And just to make 2 quick points here, I think that these boil down to what you were seeing in the field, to issues of inconsistency in the application of American effort and the lack of a historical memory. To bring up Mr. Jefferson, who opened our morning and will sort of, is the muse of today. Jefferson was the first president to authorize a coup d'etat against a foreign country. That is the Pasha of Tripoli in 1801. The American consul in Tunis had come up with the idea of replacing the Pasha, who held a number of American naval captives in his palace, with his brother from a dynastic dispute that occurred years before. American Jefferson and Madison authorized the American Marines, which becomes the basis of the Marine hymn, to the shores, to the shores of Tripoli, to overthrow the Pasha. It ends in a deal, and American forces leave in 1805, and the pretender to the throne is left to his fate. Jefferson considered this purely instrumental, and the matter was completely forgotten about in American diplomatic history, but it was absolutely not forgotten about in the Middle East and North Africa. And this idea of what the United States had done in the American intervention endures to this day. Americans simply move on to the next crisis, and Jefferson viewed this at the level of maneuvering governments purely as a tactical expediency. We did, the ability of executing military power early on was there, and then it was simply forgotten about and we had to reinvent the wheel. The second is that from a broad diplomatic perspective, going back to this morning in terms of instruments of power and influence, even at the height, we started off this morning by talking about the Cold War, the change from the Cold War. Pete talked about the idea of a 20-year hangover. It's been a lot longer than that. My dear old friend Smith Simpson wrote a book called The Crisis in American Diplomacy in 1968, in which he talked about the lack of historical training, the rotation system in the State Department that did not let people get the area knowledge, the language skills, before rotating them on, even at the height of the Cold War. And these problems have endured. And they've endured even into the post-Cold War order. And therefore, I think that reports such as this are extremely effective and necessary. But the real problem becomes training. Training for the kind of work that you have advocated. When textbooks on American foreign policy or European foreign policy used at even top-notch universities, such as the one I used to teach on down at the other end of the mountain, all begin in 1945. And you see all American foreign policy problems beginning with that sort of, that God creates the universe in a form of immaculate conception with the overthrow of Hitler and Tojo. You're not going to understand these problems. You're not going to understand Bosnia. You're not going to understand Afghanistan. And it's taken an enormous amount of time for the appreciation for historical complexity, longer-term thinking, and most importantly, training, and this is what we were talking about earlier, for a new generation of folks to succeed the current diplomatic establishment. We're not going to get this right, because we've been at this for a long time in terms of trying to establish a presence globally that equals our power in a way that's yet different from the Europeans, where you would see a lot more discussion of the historical antecedents. I talked to some foreign service folks, Bob would know this, at the time of the Dayton negotiations, who said they were amazed. They came in and were talking to the Germans and the French, who were rattling off Bismarck and the Treaty of San Stefano in 1878. And the Americans were, Vietnam was really about as far back as the American historical memory had gone. And it's the rare bird who really would understand that historical appreciation and legacy of these problems, and certainly in Afghanistan. what we did in the 1980s in terms of sort of walking out at the end of when the Soviets pulled out and creating a lot of the problems that you were referring to in terms of Charlie Wilson's war, and sort of, as he put it rather undiplomatically, he translated his word that we messed up the end game in Afghanistan. It is very similar to Jefferson did in Tripoli. It was exactly the same as in 1805, of treating these problems as tactical and instrumental rather than as the building blocks of an American footprint in international politics. So I'm heartened by this work, but also perennially frustrated that we simply can't get this historical consciousness in. And with that, I will turn hopefully to some questions. Thank you.
Yes, please. Do you want to just also introduce yourself as you ask the question?
James Savage, University of Virginia. Much of the conversation today has been on personnel, so let me answer you 3 quick personnel questions. What did you think about the reluctance of State Department officials to go to Iraq to the point where last actually ordered the men or incentivized the men to Iraq? Second of all, there was a story in the Post the other day about the civilian surge, including State Department, into Afghanistan, how they're not on rooms and so forth, to accommodate these folks. But the principal point sort of goes to what Jim was talking about, that very few of them actually had police service overseas. It's a problem of churn and rotation. And the third element, the third question has to do with contractors. They were alluded to a bit. If you could speak more to some of the contractor issues in terms of positive and negative, maybe specifically with some of the major firms such as RTI, MSI, Clearing Point, and so on.
Yeah, well, let me start, and then you can. I think it's important to recognize that while civil servants cannot be ordered to go abroad, and that can't be ordered to even shift from department to department, or even from office to department to another department without their concurrence. Foreign service officers, like military officers, are subject to worldwide assignment and can be assigned anywhere. Now, normally the effort is to fill positions with volunteers because they're going to be more enthusiastic. But there is always that alternative. Certainly during Vietnam, many foreign service officers were ordered. I think there was some initial difficulty in filling positions in Iraq when responsibility was turned back over to the State Department. In the immediate aftermath of the conflict, the responsibilities were with the Defense Department. The responsibilities for the civilian tasks and volunteers like Ron went and served under Defense Department leadership in positions which normally would have been considered diplomatic. But I think the important thing to recognize is that under the Coalition Provisional Authority, when this was run by the Defense Department, the positions were never more than 50% filled. And the average tenure was 3 months. That meant that 6 positions, 3 were vacant, 1 was filled by somebody who just gotten there. 1 was filled by somebody who was about to leave. So maybe 1 position in 6 was filled by somebody who knew what he was doing and wasn't just about to leave. Since this has been returned to the State Department and the American Embassy has been set up, it's been fully staffed. And it's been fully staffed with people who on average stay for a year. So the record is pretty credible. In Afghanistan, over the last year, the number of American civilian officials has tripled from 300 to 1,000, which obviously is still a lot less than 70,000 soldiers. But it's also important to recognize that the whole concept of a military is to have contingency forces who are waiting to be assigned, who are in training, who are available on short notice, and giving the nation a surge capacity. No civilian agency, not just the State Department, no civilian agency has a surge capacity. Every civilian has a job. And the only way you can move a civilian to something new is to tell him to stop doing what he's doing. So you have to constantly reprioritize and take people away from things which you thought were important yesterday, and now they're not as important, and you're shifting them to go to Iraq or to go to Vietnam. Congress will never fund a surge capacity for the State Department. It's never going to say, okay, we have 3,000 jobs, so you need 4,000 officers, and just in case we need some extra ones. So you're always going to have this lag between the military's capacity to show up overnight and the State Department's difficulty in sending substantial numbers of people It can send small numbers of people, as I mentioned. I was in Afghanistan before more than a few hundred soldiers got there. But it was a long time before we had 1,000 Americans, 1,000 American civilians in Afghanistan. And in fact, it took 8 years to get them there. So I think that puts it in perspective.
That's covered several points I want to cover.